Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Itchon, Senior Vice President, and with me is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications.
Hi, Ro. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Tim. Say, how are the wildfires in your area?
Well, it's pretty bad. They say now, the big one around us is the largest wildfire in California history. And it seems like we're now saying that every year, but the Dixie fire really just devastated whole communities. It's also the first fire this season where we've really had bad air quality in the Sacramento area. Friday and Saturday, it was pretty ugly around here. It wasn't worth, going outside at all. It's better today as we're taping this on Monday. But the whole town of Greenville, you saw on social media, it just ravaged the entire town. And there's a lot of debate over what should we have done differently. There's debate, the U.S. Forest Service, what they're doing, is what they're doing enough to kind of prevent these issues? What's the state doing? Of course, there was the scandal with Gavin Newsom where he said he was going to, undertake all of these fire prevention efforts, and then we didn't really do it. And we've pushed back the date for completing the promised efforts. So it's, we're in a weird time of we're fighting the fire, we're trying to protect lives and property, but yet kind of politics and the political recriminations go on.
Well, luckily for us here in Pasadena and LA County, we're not really feeling any fires right now, but it's still early in fire season. It's only August. I believe it goes through August through October is the official fire season. So anything can happen between now and then, and it could be worse. So we told viewers we would have our all-stars this week to talk about the gubernatorial debate among the replacement candidates, but we decided not to do it because, frankly, we didn't think that there was enough there to spend an entire podcast on it. Caitlyn Jenner didn't participate, neither did Larry Elder. They're among the top 5 recall candidates with the most support. But those who were there, Kevin Faulconer, who was former mayor of San Diego, businessman John the Bear Cox, Sacramento Assemblyman Kevin Kiley, and former Congressman Doug Ozzie. But, Tim, overall, I think it was a positive. There's a lot of discontent in California about how government is being managed. Californians aren't satisfied with the way COVID has been handled. Many aren't happy that schools have been closed for the whole year. And now there's a risk, of course, that they might stay closed for the fall. And of course, there's homelessness and housing affordability, the drought, the fires. I don't think Californians have heard any alternative solutions to all of our issues other than spending more and more tax dollars. And many of these candidates had offered alternatives to build more storage, to reform the California Environmental Quality Act, no mandates on masks. So I think it's overall a good thing that they had these debates because it exposed Californians to more market-oriented solutions to a lot of our issues.
That's right. And it was kind of a breath of fresh air to see candidates talking about the issues and not engaging in personal attacks or gotcha, the kind of things we're used to seeing on the presidential debate stage. That being said, candidates standing up there talking about policy issues, and I wouldn't even say they politely disagreed with one another. I mean, I think they were all kind of pretty complimentary of one another. A lot of similarities on that stage, certainly, but it doesn't make for great television. So I don't know what the ratings were for this. I imagine it did not have record viewership, but like I said, it was nice to hear people stand up and articulate market-based reforms, talk about a lot of the things that PRI scholars have talked about and explored over the years.
Yeah, I agree with you. There weren't a lot of policy differences. And, I think the point of it really is that, we don't have the luxury of having nuanced policy differences. I think the order of the day is that we have to stop this harm in California. And the question is really who's going to be the most skilled among these candidates to be able to halt the slide that we're seeing in the state.
Now, if I did have a quibble with the evening, it was, the Nixon Library hosted the debate, and they have a replica of the White House East Room where the debate was held. And it seemed like, I don't know, it didn't seem like the right staging for a debate about who the next governor of California should be. I also thought it's kind of weird. He's, I guess, run some program at the Nixon Foundation, but to have Ambassador O'Brien kind of ask questions that really were more, you'd probably ask a presidential candidate more than you would the governor of California. I thought that was, a bit odd. But in general, it was good to see 90 minutes of actual discussion about market-based policy ideas.
I'd have to agree with you on the staging, Tim. Where I think we're all spoiled from these slick, huge production value of the presidential debates. And when you look at this, you kind of get, it reminded me of like a big dinner where you had 4 panelists on the stage discussing policy over dessert. I mean, it just didn't feel like a debate that is worthy of, the 5th largest economy in the world. And so I think that next time we could do better. But kudos for the Nixon Library for pulling this off.
You're almost expecting, like you're at a White House state dinner, the band is going to strike up and someone's going to lead us in the waltz.
or a PRI dinner.
Exactly.
Although I think we would have paid a little more attention to that, Tim.
Yes, we would have.
So our guest in this podcast is Steve Greenhut, and he's one of the state's most prominent journalists and writers, writing from a libertarian perspective. He's also the Western Regional Director of the R Street Institute, and they're a think tank based in D.C. We usually have Steve right around now every year to do a kind of a legislative wrap up. But this time we have him to discuss PRI's new book, Saving California, which Steve is the editor. Tim, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's if you watch the debate and are, kind of interested in, what should the future direction of California be? Well, then Saving California is the book for you. So it's 10 very prominent market-based scholars who kind of offer their perspective. Really, almost you could read it as their advice to whoever wins this recall election about how to solve some of the state's major challenges. So it's not just griping, as you might normally read in a conservative column criticizing what's going on in California. It's realistic market-based solutions and those that have the potential to appeal across party lines and maybe form the basis for consensus. So we have chapters on healthcare, education, wildfires, water, the state budget, transportation. It's a very user-friendly, readable book that should be recommended reading for whoever the next governor will be.
Yes, and we also have some prominent names writing these chapters: Wendel Cox, Joel Kotkin, Adrian Moore, and of course, R. Sally Pipes writing on healthcare, Lance Izumi on education, Wayne Weingarten on the housing issue and homelessness. So we've got pulled together a great group of people, thanks to Steve. So we hope you'll take the time to read the book. It's available on Amazon, and we're launching it this week. So please write some good reviews on it. In future podcasts, we'll have some of the authors also talk about their chapter and some of these issues. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening. Welcome to PRI's Next Round podcast, Steve.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we're so happy to have you to talk about your new book, which PRI just published, Saving California. So Saving California, Steve, we've got fires, we have a drought, homelessness, people can't afford rents, can't afford a house, high poverty rate, businesses leaving the state. So tell us how our book, this handbook, is going to help save California. Give us an overview.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge because I think some of the state's problems are pretty obvious to anyone who lives here. I mean, our housing prices are absurd. I think the median home price in California is in the statewide has topped $800,000. I mean, that includes, markets like Bakersfield and Modesto and, inland, less primo markets, and it's still that high. And our rent rates are extremely high. So it's very hard for people to live here. I think that's the main reason polls show the main reason people, who are moving for affordability reasons. And so we've got that issue. The state's population, which had been growing, is for forever. First time in a century that the population actually fell a little bit in real terms. So it's not a myth that people are leaving. I know I have friends who were old neighbors of mine in Fullerton, and they have a booming real estate business in the Dallas area where they bring busloads of Californians out to buy homes in the Dallas area. So it's pretty incredible. And then the homeless crisis is really a crisis. I mean, everywhere we go. I mean, it's hard to believe. Every city we've just got these massive homeless encampments. And our education system, which used to be tops in the nation, is terrible in some areas, especially in some of the poorer areas. And it's our colleague Lance Izumi, who I remember his book, Not As Good As You Think, which, even the good schools maybe aren't as good as we think. And we have road congestion. I remember when Gray Davis, the last governor to face a recall, essentially said that the era of freeway building is over, and it was over. And yet the population from that point to now had grown. So we stopped building freeways. We've got wildfires. We've got drought issues. Droughts are not unpredictable, but planning for droughts, that's something the state hasn't done. So we've got all sorts of problems, budget problems, even though we have a massive surplus. And so the state has a lot of obvious problems. Healthcare issues. Our legislature keeps pushing for a single payer. So we have this legislature and this leadership that has these pie in the sky ideas, and yet they continually neglect the basic nuts and bolts of governance. And these are all governmental problems. So we have a lot of these problems can be solved or at least improved upon. And yet we don't seem to ever, our state doesn't seem to ever move in that direction. So the goal of the book is to provide some practical advice. We look at the problems, provide some solutions that push us in the right direction, but we also have to recognize that given the legislative makeup, given the ideology of the people who run our state, it's not an easy thing. So we're trying to come up with ideas that any politician from either party could embrace to help improve the situation that we face.
So, if you think about, a lot of the books and articles that we read these days about California are often just laundry lists of complaints. And certainly we give them enough fodder in this state to add to their complaint list. What I found interesting, you write in the introduction to the book that while each of the authors of the different chapters are going to offer their critiques of the status quo policy in their area, Saving California really takes a different approach. So what, in your view, sets this book apart from kind of the standard conservative criticism of California?
Yeah, it attempts to be a little bit optimistic. So you point to the introduction. I wrote about my move here from Ohio back in I guess it was 1998 at this point, and how much I fell in love with the state and how exciting it was to come here. And California had long been a magnet for people from all over the country and all over the world. And I wanted to focus on some of that sense of excitement and the love of the state. I've traveled to every county, every one of the 58 counties. I've been all over the state, and it always astounds me. It's such a beautiful, wonderful place, and it does have kind of an open culture, which I really like, having grown up on the East Coast and lived in the Midwest. I like the culture here, the people, the diversity of everything, from terrain to demographics to food to you name it. There's everything here. So it's a really wonderful place. So a lot of the critiques, I think, are just stem from maybe a dislike of the state and everything we stand for. And I wrote I wrote my introduction, and I think the writers who contributed, we write from a love of the state and a desire to see things improve. And a lot of these are public policy problems that can be addressed and improved upon. And it's not just a dumping on California. Although, the focus in what was to come up with practical solutions, but every one of the chapters, has quite a bit of complaint about how things are being run. You can't really avoid that because, setting the stage for the problems and how we got here. But the goal is to come up with some solutions, to be optimistic. We're not encouraging people to move out of the state, just encouraging our policymakers to think more creatively. And the irony is a lot of their stated goals of the progressives who run the state is to help the poor and to things such as that, to help the environment. And a lot of the ideas that we promote would actually help them achieve their goals, right? So in education, the current system is not helping the poor. Our current water policies are not helping the fish or the environment. The wildfire policies are not helping us deal with climate change as we have raging wildfires. So the goal is to promote solutions. Most of these are going to be, right of center solutions, but a lot of them are solutions that at least a lot of the Democrats have paid lip service to. Things like reform of the California Environmental Quality Act. And there are ideas here that anybody can embrace that will actually help meet the stated objectives of everyone in the state.
So the book, Saving California, is comprised of chapters from 10 leading free market thinkers, policy experts in their respective fields who offer both analysis and reform ideas. Give our listeners a preview of some of the big names that they'll read about in this book and what they write about.
Yeah, there's, Joel Kotkin, who's a, well-known writer, academic with Chapman University. Has a chapter on our business climate called Getting Back to Business. And then there's Wendel Cox, who he used to be a planner in Los Angeles. He lives in Illinois, but he's one of the great thinkers on housing policy. And he knows California really well and has some excellent ideas. Wayne Weingarten, who has an academic who focuses on homeless policy. Adrian Moore with Reason Foundation on how to decongest our roads and freeways. And we've got, I have a reprinted chapter on dealing with drought. Lance Izumi, PRI's great education expert, Lance Izumi, looks at how we can return to educational excellence. Pat Nolan, former assemblyman, deals with crime issues, and I think he strikes the right balance between, embracing criminal justice reform, but not going in the direction where some of the progressive prosecutors and some of the progressives are going. So it's a really good balance. Richard Mercereau, who was the Assembly's top staffer, Republican staffer for many years, looks at some of the more budgetary issues, how to create a sustainable budget, some of the best practices that we can embrace. Dan Kolke, attorney, a prominent attorney, and he was involved in writing a number of initiatives and deeply involved in California politics and on the wildfires. Extremely insightful, in-depth chapter on how we can deal practically with the wildfire problems that we're dealing with. And Sally Pipes, president of PRI, Toward a Healthier California. She's a renowned expert on healthcare and looks at California's unique healthcare challenges and pushes for a more market-based approach, with the goal of providing better healthcare for everyone. So, those are the authors, and they're all well-known California people, and so that's the preview.
So there's so many different ideas put forward by the various authors in Saving California that we can't discuss them all today. Plus, we want them to buy the book and read their ideas. But perhaps we could give our listeners a little tease. Maybe you could share one or two ideas that you found either particularly innovative or maybe has the potential for attracting bipartisan support.
Yeah, I think Wendel Cox on the housing area, he pitches something called the housing opportunity area, in which there's a reduction on impact fee reform and reduction in some of the regulations in some of the state's inland areas to promote, new green fields development, which would take pressure off of the crazy real estate situation along the coast. I thought that was an innovative idea that I hadn't thought of before. Wayne Weingarten, another one, he talks about the link between Prop 47, which was the initiative that reduced penalties for various property crimes, and how that's made it more difficult for officials to deal with the homeless population, because a lot of the folks who commit these lower level crimes are homeless people. And he pushes the idea for a homeless court, which some counties in California already have them. But the goal of homeless courts isn't to jail or imprison people. It's a way of taking a homeless person and finding them the services they need. And that's an idea that, in fact, former Assemblyman Mike Gatto had talked about a statewide initiative that would create a statewide homeless court system. But that's I think that's an innovative way of thinking about homelessness. And so those are a couple of the ideas. I think Pat Nolan talks about something as simple as matching inmates with mentors who can help deal with some of the recidivism problems. And of course, I write about some of the ways we can deal with the water situation, which focuses on planning ahead. It's kind of hard to do anything about a drought when we have a drought, but things through expanding our water infrastructure so we can save water in wet years. Water recycling, which environmentalists like that. Orange County has a wonderful recycling program. And, and Sally Pipes talks about the importance of telemedicine and the allowing the sale of short-term and association health plans to provide affordable coverage options and drive down premiums. So those are some of the general ideas that we touch on.
So, Steve, let's focus on your chapter a little bit more. You covered extensively in your other book by PRI, Winning the Water Wars, California's Drought. While a lot of topics you cover focus on longer term efforts like building water storage, what can Governor Newsom and state and local water officials do in the short term to address the immediate drought while, as you recommend, moving toward a policy of abundance over managing scarcity?
Yeah, the frustrating thing on water is, some of us have been calling for, when the last drought ended 4 years ago and Jerry Brown signed the resolution ending the drought, that was the time to start building ahead. And from what I see, the new administration really, it's just been business as usual. It hasn't done very much to address that. But so it's these projects take time. But there are some things. For instance, there's a proposed desalination plant in Huntington Beach, and the governor supports that project. He could streamline some of the, some of the regulatory barriers that are holding up that plant. So that plant, we could get that online much more quickly. So that would be, something that would be a short-term fix, and could also streamline regulations to get some of these water recycling plants, going beyond Orange County. So 50% of the state's water is for environmental uses, 40% for ag, 10% for urban uses, which includes the 5.7% that's for residential. So if we focus solely on conservation and rationing, that's really not going to get us where we need to go. But I think getting the desal plants online quickly. The governor could use his political authority and his executive powers to get those systems online. They're private, public-private partnerships, but they're mostly private, and we could get those systems online more quickly. And it's an expensive form of water, relatively speaking, but it's a consistent form of water, and I think most people would be happy to have the additional water right now. But some of these things, what can you do if it takes years to build a project? But he could work on the regulatory aspect of it and fast track some of these projects, which have been vetted for many years, sometimes decades. So we could get some of the regulatory hurdles removed, and remove some of the hurdles for buying and selling and trading water.
So normally this time of year, we have our annual look at what has the legislature done in the year that has passed. So not surprisingly, COVID and the budget and the recall pretty much dominated everything at the Capitol this year. So what are some of your big takeaways from this year's legislative session? And what do you think is going to be the biggest piece of unfinished business that Sacramento will have to try and resolve next year?
Yeah, I think, it's COVID has dominated everything. And it's kind of hard to think of legislation outside of COVID related. I think some of the anti-eviction restrictions, which are going to further muddy the waters and make it difficult for small landlords, and I think it's going to help. It's going to distort the housing market even more. But I think it's SB 9 and 10, the bills that allow higher density construction. That seems like a major part of unfinished business. And the state's going to have to, the legislature's going to have to figure out what it wants to do. I think there's a good idea there in reducing, building regulations and creating a by right construction. Unfortunately, legislators only want to allow easier construction of the types of projects they want. And what we need in the state is easier construction of all types of projects. Now, I'm supportive of that approach. I rather take half a loaf than not get any of the loaf. But they're going to have to start thinking about some of these housing restrictions and the urban growth boundaries that are really the cause of our diminished supply. The Legislative Analyst's Office did a report, I think it's a couple years ago, just showing how significantly the state is underbuilding just to keep pace with the population we have. So the legislature needs to focus on housing issues.
So good timing for the release of Saving California, because we've got this gubernatorial recall election right on the horizon. So in your view, where do things stand today? Is Governor Newsom on the cusp of being recalled, or will he beat back the recall effort? And if Newsom wins on September 14th, what policy direction do you think he'll take in the aftermath of the election and, of course, the COVID situation?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to tell. I thought that the recall was looking like a missed opportunity. I thought that the governor would be able to, wouldn't have any problems whatsoever. But the latest polls show it's awfully close, and he might actually be in trouble. It's still maybe something of a missed opportunity. I remember I covered the 03 recall closely with Schwarzenegger, and the opponent, Gray Davis, was in a lot more trouble in terms of polling, and the recall supporters had a big name candidate in Arnold Schwarzenegger. And there was the debate last night, and I've talked with some of the recall replacement candidates, and whatever one thinks of any of them, they're not really that big of a name. So I personally, this doesn't reflect what I think about whether it should or shouldn't happen, but I personally think he survives, but it's going to be a lot closer than anyone had expected. It's hard, it's pretty clear that when the recall started gathering steam, that had an influence on the governor's handling of the COVID restrictions, because he had been really frustrating how he had been handling them, and he much more quickly opened things up. So it'll be it's something that's clearly going to influence how he handles, this new Delta variant and rules for that. So it's interesting to be able to pressure him. And Hiram Johnson, the progressive governor who came up with the recall, the referendum and the initiative. I mean, he argued in his first inaugural address, that the recall should be applied to every politician. So I don't have any problem with having a recall. It's an important check on the power of governors and legislators, and those sorts of direct democracy provisions are throughout our state constitution, and it's a way for the people to check the powers that be. So I have no problem with the process, but of course, if he survives, and especially if he survives by a large amount, then he'll be pretty untouchable. And even if the recall succeeds, the new governor will only have a year before there's another election. So I don't know, and it's a point I make in this book, I don't know that this is the solution to the state's problems. It's certainly an interesting aspect of it, but we're looking more towards policy solutions rather than political solutions.
So, kind of dovetailing off the recent debate of four of the Republican candidates, if we wake up on September 15th, the day after my birthday, and one of these Republican challengers stuns the world and prevails, what course do you think that a new Republican governor would chart in their first 100 days?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I mean, I think most of the Republicans certainly are understand the problems that we discuss in this book. I mean, I think they've all, to one degree or another, have pointed at homelessness and housing and water policy, wildfire, education. So I think they're on the same page on some of these issues. It's just what could they get done? I imagine that they're, given that the current governor has used executive powers in a pretty grandiose manner. I expect that they would try to use executive powers to accomplish some of these things and bypass the legislature. I'm always leery of the excessive use of executive powers. I mean, we have a system of checks and balances for a reason, but it's so I've been disturbed by the Governor Newsom's many uses of executive powers. Many of those things don't really deal directly with COVID, even, right? There's some of these anti-eviction rules and this is problematic. So, but I think Republicans are gonna use that power to advance their goals if they get in power.
Finally, Steve, whether Governor Newsom or one of his challengers prevails, what's the biggest takeaway from Saving California that you would offer as policy advice to whomever the voters entrust to lead the state after September 14th?
Yeah, a lot of the problems that we have, we're pretty much everyone's in agreement on, right? We have a housing crisis, a homelessness crisis, education system that's not serving poor kids. I would advocate that we put aside some. I know it sounds namby-pamby, but we put aside some of the partisanship and try to look at some areas that we can address things. Like the housing issue is a good example that pretty much everyone realizes. I mean, we look at the legislative analyst's office. Even some of the Democrats recognize that we have a housing supply problem, and that why do we have a housing supply problem? Because the state imposes so many barriers towards construction and imposes so many costs. So, I'm hoping that we could look at some of these things. I mean, former Governor Brown on the education, he was a big advocate for charter schools. This governor has given into the California Teachers Association, which wants to rein in the use of charter schools, but competition is the best way to help the plight of poor kids in particular. So I'm hoping that we could focus more on some of these ways that we can actually fix things. CEQA was a good example. Everyone pays lip service to the need for CEQA reform in the Capitol. Then what happens, like when Sacramento, the city of Sacramento wanted to build a new arena for the Kings, the basketball team. they do. They exempt the project from CEQA. So if legislators, if the first thing they want to do on projects they care about is streamline CEQA, well, maybe they'll figure out that it needs to be streamlined for all sorts of projects. So I'm just hoping that people will focus on some of the detailed policy discussions and less of the broader political discussions.
Thank you so much, Steve. And please, if you're very interested in California's issues, please check out our book, Saving California, on Amazon and all of your online booksellers, and also some of the local booksellers. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.